Hey, folks, this podcast is brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to states near you. They're giving out boosts. They're giving out bonuses. They're slashing lines all day long. Hop in those player prop DFS contests. It's a real fun platform over there. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you an interlude episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. This is the day after UFC 326. We got more combat sports coming up this week. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady for picks on all that stuff. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Now available on Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music. And with us today,
well, ladies and gentlemen, after 3 rounds, we go to the scorecards, and all 3 judges see it. 30-27 for your winner by unanimous decision from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Devin.
This man is a 17-fight veteran of the UFC, of 14-10 professional. Give it up for Devin Brown Bear Clark. Devin, thank you so much for being here with us today. How's it going, man?
Oh, going good. I love that intro.
Oh, thank you. And with us today also for a frequent guest co-host Connor Slone, be a part of this conversation. Now, Devin, first and foremost, your last fight was at LFA 214 with Bevan Lewis. That was a real close fight, decided on razor-thin margins, and fought at heavyweight. That was back in August. Was that something that, like, because I know you guys have been familiar with each other before that fight. Was that something like, yeah, like, we don't need to cut weight for this? Like, what was it? How did it end up at heavyweight?
I'm sitting at like 250 right now, and that's what I was before that too. I'm a bigger guy. And when I was fighting UFC, you're making a lot of money to make that weight. It's just not quite worth it when you're not making very much money. I've always thought about fighting at heavyweight. I had one heavyweight fight in the UFC, and that was my only KO. So I'm like, I can do it. And I'll probably fight heavyweight again. So just a bigger guy now and kind of adjusting to that.
And like, yeah, against William Knight, you weighed in at like 223, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we're seeing a lot more people do that. And one, it underscores the need for probably a cruiserweight and bridgerweight kind of divisions in MMA.
Yeah.
But we're seeing a lot more people do that because there's, especially in certain tiers of the UFC, there's a clear path like up the rankings at heavyweight, especially right now when the heavyweight division is in flux. So after the fight with Bevan, is like fighting at heavyweight something that you're like more thinking about moving forward?
I think so. And if I need to fight light heavyweight, I'll do that as well. But for the time being, I'll just do the heavyweight thing, because I'm not doing, the 8-week camps away from home and stuff like that right now. So yeah, just seeing what heavyweight's like and kind of owning that. I'll probably will lose some weight though. I think my good power zone's about 230. So when I'm around 230 pounds, I feel like that's when I fight the best.
Okay, yeah. And so right now, like it's been a big comment. It seems like maybe people are missing weight a little bit less than they were like a few months ago. Like there's always periods
Mhm.
of time where it seems like every main event or every main card is being affected by, weight cuts. And there was that period of time where we were seeing main events affected by people passing out and having to go to the
Mhm.
hospital. What do you think is the future of weight classes in MMA? Because I think what we'd all love to avoid seeing is it becoming boxing. I think we
Yeah.
get to see that with MMA, like in a lot of different facets. But part of the problem with boxing is every championship is divided by like 3 pounds. You've got 50 champions across boxing, and that
Yeah.
I mean that's just talking people that have name recognition. So, what do you think is the future of the weight class distribution system in mixed martial arts?
Uh, well, I hope that at least one or two more divisions get added. Maybe not much more than that, but I do see a need for at least one or two more divisions. And then just people being smart about it. If you can't make the weight, move up, get more muscle. Instead of cutting 20 pounds, you move up, gain muscle weight, then you're cutting 10 to 12 pounds, stuff like that. And as the guys get older, they don't really have a choice anyways.
What do you think like are the two most like strategically wise divisions that could be added?
Well, for me, I think 225 would be a good one.
Yeah, I think like cruiserweight, and then you're gonna have to find something in between like the 170 and 190, like or 160, 190. Like there's got to be something
Yeah.
else to add in there, considering the gaps that there are between lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight. I mean, you see the
Mhm.
difference when like Izzy tried to go up and fight Jan at light heavyweight. It's like
Yeah.
that is a massive gap. And when people have to make the decision between 205, 185, and 170, it just
Mhm.
leaves some people between a rock and a hard place.
It really does, especially when you guys got guys like Jan, fights at light heavyweight, walks around 230, 240, at
Yeah, he's
heavyweight. So,
massive. Can I jump in with a question here, Brady? So, uh, if we look at like what one championship is doing with their hydration test,
yeah.
and they're clearly trying to, prevent weight cutting. Do you think that's something that MMA might move towards in the future, especially if, there are any other incidents where weight cutting kind of affects people's health? Is that something you'd like to see implemented, or are you okay with kind of obviously there's a science to weight cutting. It can give you certain advantages. So just want to get your thoughts on that.
Oh, that's a hard one because you kind of want to give guys their freedom, right? It's like
Mm.
it's your body. If you want to cut all that weight, that's fine. But then also the dangers of it. But I think the hydration tests are a good thing.
Mhm.
I know they use it in NCAA wrestling and it works. You don't have guys are still cutting weight, but they're not getting sick and they're wrestling better. So I think something like that wouldn't be a bad idea at all.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I do think there's some maybe some shadiness that goes on in the background with specifically one championship. I know sometimes their fighters they look way too huge to be able to pass those hydration tests,
Mhm.
but I didn't know they did in wrestling. That's good. I think definitely.
So yeah, for wrestling, beginning of the year before the season starts, they'll like do a hydration pre-qualify, and that'll
Mm.
let you know what weights you can wrestle at. So it might fluctuate a little bit, but they let you know the lowest you can go with your hydration level.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're still giving some room for weight cutting, but kind of
Mhm.
finding a safe range for it. I like that. It seems like a
Yeah,
good compromise.
it seems like it works well. So
And speaking of which, so you were the South Dakota State champion at 189 pounds in
yeah.
wrestling in high school. You went to Rochester Community and Technical College, where you were a two-time junior college All-American at 184 pounds and won the national championship in 2009. So first question, just about purely wrestling, is like, I know some wrestlers, like, those are because wrestlers have been practicing cutting weight a lot of the time since like middle school, like depending on how, probably even earlier, based on the look that you just gave.
Yeah.
I know wrestlers are very seasoned at weight cutting. It's something that they've been used to doing their whole life. And I've heard from different people like the cuts that they were making in college wrestling sounded absolutely absurd. So like what are some things that you saw in your time like in college wrestling as far as weight cutting goes?
Uh, well, I almost took myself out when I was wrestling junior college. At the time, I was on Adderall, and maybe not using it the best way, but I took my Adderall on a day that I was cutting weight, and I think I was trying to go like 10 pounds in a day, and I got completely dehydrated. Couldn't keep anything down. Probably should have went to the doctor. My coach threw me some vitamin C tabs. Took those. Then I didn't have to wrestle that night. It was a duel, but I did have to weigh in and go out there, get my hand raised and stuff. But it's stuff like that where it's like, oh, I only have 8 pounds today in one day. And it's different from MMA because MMA, you hold that off for like 2 months, right? You're doing one weight cut. I had
Mhm.
just cut weight the week before and I'm cutting eight pounds again. It just not safe. But I haven't seen anything too crazy where guys had to be rushed off to the ER or nothing like that.
Well, I know that amphetamine overuse can certainly lead to some like drastic movements in weight. And
Mhm.
at the very least, I know that like it wouldn't necessarily have you at your best to compete athletically, especially if you're not sleeping or eating right, because those
Yeah.
are two things that you can't do with overuse of amphetamines.
Yeah. And well, and after that, I was like, after this, I never took Adderall again after that. It was a eye-opening thing, and maybe I need it. I do have the ADHD or ADD or whatever. I don't know, but it's like screw it. I'll get by. And I have, but it was just too, it's a drug. And then when you're trying to do a dangerous thing like cut weight on top of it, not good.
So, like, it was actually pretty quickly into your professional career that you ended up signing with the UFC. You were the
Mhm.
RFA light heavyweight champion in April of 2016. June of 2016, you get the fight with Alex Nicholson. So
Yep.
it was one, two, three, four, five, six fights into your professional career. And interestingly enough, we just saw Luke Fernandez 6 fights into his professional career
Mhm.
get his UFC debut last night and kind of got a welcome to the UFC moment with Rodolfo
Yeah.
Beato. So what is the experience for fighters like so quickly into your professional career, getting that call and like Alex Nicholson, kind of a guy like yourself who at different times can fight it lower weights. He can fight at
Mhm.
heavyweight and beats very competitive names.
Uh, I mean, the whole process was very quick, right? Like you're moving up the ranks. And at the time, at 6-0, I was like, UFC's there, but I'm a ways away from that. And then just happened to get the opportunity. Dana White was in town that night for his show, looking for a fight,
Mhm.
and he was in the crowd. So then all of a sudden, it became, in that camp, it was like, okay, this is our chance to get to the UFC, and record didn't matter, nothing like that. And so I got signed that night. But I feel like guys like that, it's how did they get to that point where they could be 6-0, get signed to the UFC, be that promising, um, and then you're making your debut and it's like, oh shit, this is real. Maybe I wasn't ready. But you just kind of have to go with the flow and be the best you can be. I think I won 2 fights after that debut, and it was just after that, it was like, okay, I'm a UFC fighter. Still learning on the job. Uh, but it was, but I did it for almost 8 years and proud of that, even with my, at that point, the experience doesn't matter because you make up for it. You're training, after that, before my UFC debut, went down to Jackson Wink MMA and started training with world-class guys like John Jones and everybody else that was in the room and coaches and everything. So you just kind of get thrown into it and you adjust. And I believe Alex Nicholson did that as well. And that dude's he's a career fighter. He loves to fight. I still follow him. He's still fighting quite a bit. So, but yeah, it's a process, big learning curve. Yeah.
Do you think there's any added pressure kind of making that UFC debut as an undefeated fighter at the time? Do you think, having that O next to your name just adds a little bit of pressure, or does it really not change your mentality at all?
For me, no. It wasn't until after I lost that fight that I even, thought about the pressure of it.
Hmm.
At the time, young, undefeated, it's like I can't lose. You have that feeling I can't lose, and you're putting the work in to not lose. And then after you take that first loss, that's when the pressure comes. It's like I was supposed to be this thing, and I wasn't supposed to lose. I had my eyes on being a young UFC champion,
Mhm.
trying to follow John Jones, stuff like that. And at some point, you have to look at reality and see where you're at, and then just do the best you can.
Yeah, I'm sure winning two in a row, bouncing back from that first loss, definitely helps out with that.
Yeah, and then I think I fought Jan Blachowicz.
It's a tough one.
They threw people at me, and I'm happy about that. It's like I had a tough road in the UFC, and I got to fight a lot of really good guys. A lot of times it was before they made that jump of being top 10 or whatever, or having a
Right.
big name. I fought them early on. Like that Jan fight, he had been in the UFC for a while, but he was about to get cut if he lost to me.
Mhm.
And he ended up beating me and then going on to become champion and stuff like that. And then you have a few other guys that very high level that kind of barely lost to, but
Yeah, like Rockets. He
oh,
kind of had a career surge after his fight with you as well. So those are two very
definitely.
tough names, absolutely, at any point in their career.
hmm And that one, like, it's just, each fight can change your life, right? If I would have won that racket fight, that I would have been in a totally different situation. Um, it, it's the fight game.
Yeah.
It's a crazy game, but in that fight, I dropped him. He was out. I held him up. The ref didn't call it. Then I threw like 12 illegal knees because I didn't know it. And the ref was just sitting there. Like, the
Out there.
ref didn't say shit and then stopped the
Uh-huh.
fight. And then he comes back and drops me. It's like, you know, the fight game.
Yeah.
It, I mean, like you pretty much like, with the exception of maybe one person, you never lost a fight in the UFC that wasn't to somebody who was either ranked or ranked at some point.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was like, and you've beaten several fighters that also occupy the rankings at different weight
Mhm.
classes. Because after, so in between Alexander Rakic was Mike Rodriguez, or in between Jan and Alexander Rakic was Mike Rodriguez. After that, you
Mhm.
unanimous decision over Darko Stosic. Then it was the Ryan Spann fight. Um,
Yeah.
so like, but two fights later, you pick up a win over Daquan Townsend, but Alonzo Minifield, always a tough guy to beat, no matter
Yeah.
where he's at. Um,
Yeah.
so like the level of competition in the UFC between light heavyweight and heavyweight and middleweight, like what were like some poignant differences you noticed between fighting the dudes at, between the different weight classes?
Um, there's not a whole lot of difference, right? If you're over 185 or if you're a 185er, you're still training with the heavyweights and the light heavyweights. We all train together in practice. If you're over that threshold, walking around about 220, we're all training together. So, um, I think the biggest thing, well, it's hard to say the biggest thing because the speed I think is relatively the same. Um, Middleweight, light heavyweight. Then you got a few heavyweights that can deliver pretty good speed too. But just like when you're in there, you have to adjust to so many different things. So if they don't have the speed, they have the power, and vice versa. Um, but everybody's goddamn strong. After middleweight, everybody is strong, and it's not until you get into the top tier heavyweights where there's a big separation of the strength. Of like once you get into the Curtis Blades, that's when you realize, oh shit, this is a different type of human.
Mhm.
Um, so it's I'd say it's relatively the same. Besides that,
And you can look at that dude and know that he's like a tier above people in strength. Like specifically Curtis Blades. But yeah, like at heavyweight, there's a very clear gap now between like the top handful of dudes in the world and the rest of the top 15, which is made up of like, look, like there's some younger guys that have made their way into the rankings that I have some skepticism about how far maybe they'll be able to make it, depending on a bunch of dudes that could retire soon. Like that's what
yeah,
occupies the middle of the heavyweight, the meat of the rankings is guys that like you don't know how many more fights they have. Even Alexander Volkov, who has now been scheduled to fight Waldo. Dude, if Volkov wins another fight, like I think he won the last fight with Cyril Gahn. Who knows what's next for Volkov? But who the hell knows
Yeah.
what's next for the heavyweight belt? So it's a very strange time for heavyweight in particular. But like, between all these fights that you've had in the UFC, 17 fights in the UFC over that period of time. That is, that's a good run under the UFC banner. What was the fight that you look back on now as like that was the fight you enjoyed the most?
The Alonzo Manningfield fight.
Really? Why's that?
I broke my orbital about a minute into it. Um, he's one of the strongest humans that I've met. And he threw an uppercut, didn't even put his body into it. It was all arm, and he broke my orbital. And at the time, being wrestling based and stuff like that, I hadn't gotten hit much in fights. I'm not a brawler. And I had never really had a true black eye. And so I remember thinking to myself in the fight, it happened, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what a black eye feels like. I'm just being a pussy, like keep going, whatever. And then like it was when that happened, something flipped in my mind. It was pure like it was freedom. I could say like it's a bit of survival, but it's like, all right, you're hurt. The worst you can be hurt. Let go. And from there, it was just a grind. Yeah, it was beautiful moment. And then to get the victory, after a fight like that, it was memorable, very memorable.
So at the time, did you just think you had a black eye and didn't really register the orbital was broken? Did you not figure that out until later, or could you tell in the middle of the fight it was broken?
No, I had no idea. I thought it was just a black eye.
That's what adrenaline will do for you.
And then, oh yeah, and then they didn't even give me the speech afterwards. And they just rushed me right to the hospital. And they treated it as a freaking like level 1 trauma. So like all hands on deck, like I was dying. Like I'm fine.
I just fought 3 rounds after that happened.
Yeah, so yeah, it was a very interesting fight, but yeah, one of my favorites. It was just one of those. It was the closest I've been to a brawl, I guess.
Dude, that's the best possible opportunity at the hospital to deliver the line. You should see the other guy. Like, it's just so funny when I ask you about your most enjoyable fight, and the first sentence you spoke was against Alonzo Menifield. I broke my orbital in the first couple minutes. Damn, that's how the most enjoyable fight started. So
Yeah.
I mean, like, so because as you describe yourself, like you're not a brawler, like you're like, but your style has always been a difficult challenge for everybody that's ever stepped into the cage with you. It's a difficult skill set to plan for. Now, like, this is an interesting era of combat sports where outside of the UFC, we right now there's a few organizations that are kind of vying for being that second best organization. There's one PFL. Ryzen is the organization that I'm the biggest fan of outside of the UFC. But like,
Okay.
we're not in the Pride, Strikeforce, Bellator era like anymore, where there's a clear cut number 2. But what we do have in this era of combat sports is in like a very creative and unique array of opportunities outside of the UFC that people are coming up with every day. Like karate combat, dirty boxing, the amount of boxing opportunities for MMA fighters that are out there right now. And then you've got RAF, like which has really blown up like through their deal with Fox. Like they have a huge amount of like big wrestling matches they put on. Hell, the brawl that Armin was a part of the other day like went viral. Everybody was talking about that. So, is that something that now that you're like, looking for opportunities outside of the UFC, are any of those things that you've like put thought into?
Absolutely. So I definitely I would love to wrestle RAF. I didn't do much freestyle when I was a kid or nothing, but I've learned it since, and I feel like I could do all right. And like I said, wrestling is my base. So, and I still wrestle. I wrestle with Augustana University every week. I help coach up there, but really I get in there and I go with the guys, and I still got that, still super athletic, so I could kind of do a little bit of anything, also jujitsu stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm still a fighter. I'm still able to. For me, that's kind of retirement stuff. To do something outside of the MMA. Just like I said, just the rush and the joy that you get from getting in a fight, knowing you volunteered for this. You volunteered to jump in a cage with the guy that's trying to take your head off. And that still excites me. So I'm definitely not done fighting yet, and working on a few different opportunities for that. In one of those, maybe in one of those promotions. So yeah, we'll just kind of see. I'm still 35. I'll be 36 here in April, but still plenty of time for me. I'm still athletic. Had to rest a little bit, had to rest, set up the next chapter, stuff like that. So now I'm kind of ready to fight again.
So, like, for a fighter in your position, I mean, like the last fight was in LFA, but the thing is, it was against Devin Lewis, who is like a fighter with like UFC experience, like yourself.
Yeah.
And LFA is an organization kind of in the middle of like different categories of promotions. Like
Yeah.
it's almost hard to call LFA like a regional or a feeder promotion. Like that is an
Yeah.
international promotion. They put on events in Brazil,
Yeah.
and I can't even count how many UFC fighters have made their way through the LFA ranks. So it's kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
a promotion in the middle there. But like, is the thought for you like get back to the UFC, or for whatever that would mean for getting back, or is the like get the biggest fight you can no matter where it is?
Yeah. I would love to fight in the UFC again. Absolutely. If they offer me a fight, I would absolutely. I'll make the weight, whatever weight, and fight that fight. But if not, in the last couple of years since I've been out of the UFC, uh, as in most guys, when they get out of the league, whether it's NFL, whatever, UFC, you go through some shit. You're just at the top level. Now you're not. So you got the depression and all that stuff, and so it's taken a couple years to get to where I'm comfortable if I never fight in the UFC again, or if I'm not that guy again. Like I'm finally comfortable with just being me. I'm a family guy, but I can still fight, and I'm thinking about the future in other ways other than just fighting. But then you just can't take the fighter out of a guy. So it's like you offer me a fight, I'm taking the fight, and that's kind of what happened with the LFA one. It was in my hometown, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I had talked about it, doing it with my manager, and then I didn't think it was going to happen. And then it was like 3 weeks out, and they're like, "Hey, we got the fight." I'm like, "Oh shit, okay." So I think I had like a 1 week little camp down in Florida at Kill Cliff to get ready for that fight. So I took that on 3 weeks' notice. And now, so I ended up losing that fight, wasn't prepared. It was a shit fight. And now my focus is on not letting that fight be my last fight.
Mhm.
Like that can't happen for me. I can't go out like that. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, like one, I think that like you still have plenty of big fights ahead of you, and I think that wherever those end up happening, I think that like you can get really competitive fights against good fighters, and those can be
Mhm.
really entertaining fights to watch. At the same time, man, like you were that dude in the UFC for like 8 years. 17
Yeah.
fights in the UFC, ultimately going 8 and 9 in that time, and winning some fights against guys that were in the rankings, and the losses were to some of the guys that were the best in the world and ended up being
Yeah.
champions. So no
Mhm.
matter what, like you should look back on that UFC run and whatever perspective it takes, being able to last 17 fights in the UFC at all is something absolutely to be proud of in your career.
Yeah. I appreciate that, and I am proud of that. And like I said, like the last 2 years, I kind of had to come to a realization to not look at that as a failure. Um, because the goal the whole time was to be a champion. And, it's just not everybody can be champion. There's so much talent. And I'm proud to fight the guys that I did fight. And I learned so much and it's made me who I am. Um, so yeah, definitely, like I said, I feel comfortable with it now. What I accomplished, 7 years or eight, whatever it was, 7, 8 years in the UFC. I travel all around the world. Half the time it was with my dad, my big black daddy. Took him all the way to Russia, Poland, Sweden. We did some shit. And other people weren't doing what we were doing. So it's definitely something to be proud of, and those are memories that I can keep with me. And my daughter has, and my wife, and it's been our life. So it's yeah.
And I think that's something that people might not think about, like with fighters, is like, yeah, like these are the fights you won and lost. These are the fights that you had, but like all the journey in between of all the different
Mhm.
things you do, the people that you meet, and the places you get to go, just in the journey
Mhm.
in between, like is a whole story in and of itself.
Oh, it really is. That's depending on how you did it, that's the stuff that can write books. I got plenty of good stories, especially, with my dad. He's a bit of a character, so it's like just seeing how people would react to us because we were kind of a package deal, I suppose. And just, you know, being different in different places. Uh, Very cool, and seeing how nice people are around the world. And one of the biggest things though is going into another country, or around the US, whatever, like as a fighter, the respect that you get, it makes it worth it, right? To be in the position you're being, to be a fighter, like to see how much respect people have for you just because you do this thing that's hard and kind of not normal to most people. So that's a huge thing for me too.
So I have a question about like just the future direction of mixed martial arts, and then I think Connor probably has a question or two about your time at like Jackson Wink MMA.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but as far as the future of mixed martial arts, this is a very like this is a strange period, like people
Mhm.
think there's an issue with star power when it comes to the UFC. I think
Yeah.
people have a lot of questions about like how the UFC is going to do business moving forward, maybe what would be best for the fighters for the UFC doing business moving forward. That's a constant. It's been a constant topic of conversation for 20 years.
Mhm.
That's been since people realized they could make a living doing this. It's been a topic of
Mhm.
conversation. Um, and with the UFC now being on the Paramount deal, it blows my mind every week now when I watch a UFC numbered event. Like, oh my God, I don't have to pay for a pay-per-view. They're really not doing.
Yeah.
I can really watch it like this. What do you think are going to have to be some things about mixed martial arts that are different moving forward for it to be a healthier sport for everyone overall?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think like what you said with the star power, that's a real thing now. And it's always been like the star power, but now you got so much money tied up into it. Now you're getting billion-dollar TV deals and shit like that. It's like um it won't be the same as it was. It just can't be. The more you move up, you've seen this with the NFL and all the other big leagues and stuff like that. You've seen it change over the last 10, 15 years, 5 years, with the safety protocols, the money stuff, the caps, like all that. It's like, it'll never be what it was. I'm assuming it'll turn into kind of a different, bigger thing. And, they'll probably take a page out of the NFL stuff, or, they're looking at what's selling. How do you how do you get big? And I know that's one of the models they're probably looking at. So it's like it's hard to say, and it's also, the talent that you have coming up. Now you're getting a different generation of fighters, right? like the kids that see me fight, that saw my generation fight, and we saw maybe one other generation fight, like the sport's growing, it's getting older, and the talent's going to change, and it's only going to get better. These kids are training at 7, 8 years old now for MMA style stuff. If it's not MMA in itself, whether it's jujitsu, wrestling, but a lot of these kids have that in mind. They want to be MMA superstar, and they've already started training it as a kid. And a lot of times, this is without, you know, the rough life. Even in my generation of fighter, a lot of the guys had something they were fighting and why they were fighting. They weren't fighting just because, they were a fan of MMA growing up and stuff like that. A lot of times it was they went through some shit. This is their outlet. They can do it. So they, deep down, we have to do it because this is, this is what this is where fate brought us, like we had the strong time so we can handle this career. And I feel like that's going to kind of change.
And I had just talked about that with somebody recently, where it's like this is a different era of the sport where like
Mhm.
the reason the conversation about the way business is done in the sport is so prevalent is because this is a different kind of person that's fighting
Yeah.
nowadays. These are people,
Yeah.
and you get it like it doesn't necessarily hurt the product because you're getting
Mhm.
more well-rounded athletes. You're getting people who are just athletes that want to fight. So
Yeah.
that's different than it used to be. At the same time,
Mhm.
not everybody is in MMA because something from their life just made them a fighter at their core
Yeah.
necessarily.
Mhm.
So it's that part is interesting. And as far as star power goes, it's so weird, right? Because this is the social media era, yeah,
Yeah.
and this is an era dominated by short clips of podcasts and Instagram and TikTok followers and all that stuff, and all that stuff has to play into how the UFC does business. You take a guy like
Mhm.
Sean O'Malley. More
Yeah.
Sean O'Malley is what you would say is famous. Like people know who Sean O'Malley is. He's a guy that's considered a draw by the UFC. A lot
Yeah.
of people, a lot more people probably know who Sean O'Malley is than people who necessarily maybe knew who Chuck Liddell was at his time at the top of
Yeah.
the UFC. So the
Mhm.
fame in aggregate might be higher, but we would never say that Sean O'Malley is a bigger star than Chuck Liddell. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting data points that are driving this era of being a fighter where so much of it comes down to individual personality and individual draw.
Yeah. And like you said, social media, that's what that is, You got a younger fan base, and it's like, what do they relate to? They're relating to people doing stupid shit on the internet. The number you can be on the internet, like, and get more people talking about you, the bigger star you're going to be nowadays, and that's just how it is. Like, and on top of that, Sean could fight. Um, but and then yeah, it's just I, I hate social media. I'm like I'm not a fan of social media. I don't like doing things because other people might like it, or like being a slave of the internet. Like, oh, if someone did this, I have to follow this trend. Oh, I need to make a video today. I absolutely hate that. And then, I'll have my times where I'm like, oh yeah, I'll post something. And it's just, if I want to post something, but I hate feeling that anxiety of, oh, I got to put something funny out or I got to do this. Like it's, and I feel like that hurt my UFC career a little bit. Um, my star power. Like I didn't do the extra stuff on that side of things. I did all the extra stuff for the fighting, but I didn't do the extra stuff on the internet and social media, and all the jaw jacking, talking shit. Like that's just not me, and I refuse to sell out for that. So,
I think
um,
it's a good thing. I think we've seen, some fighters that it's clearly not in their personality, but they try to, push
yeah,
that persona anyway, and it just comes off as fake. So I
yeah,
think, yeah, just being who you are, being genuine is definitely the fans appreciate that more, at least the good fans. So I think that's is what it is. But I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm happy with the decisions I made. I could have a lot more money now if I would have talked more shit and done stupid shit, but I'm chilling. I'm cool.
It's
That
it,
actually is a good segue into some questions that I had. I just want to kind of get your perspective on something that me and Brady talk about very frequently is fighter pay. And we're definitely kind of advocates for, we think the fighters, especially in the UFC, should get paid more and
Yeah,
kind of have more consistent healthcare, things like that. But one thing that has always just been a real sticking point that has bugged me is that in 2014, when the UFC got their exclusive deal with Reebok, they didn't allow fighters to have sponsors on their shorts anymore. To me, it
yeah.
seems like that would be a really easy way to, allow fighters to get more money based on their own star power. So I just want to get your thoughts on that. Is that something that ever kind of bothered you in your UFC tenure? I know that happened before you went to the UFC, but just any general thoughts on fighter pay or specifically sponsors with on their shorts, I guess.
Well, yeah. So like with the sponsor thing, that was kind of a big deal, and I didn't agree with it. So I was right at the beginning of that transition when I got into the UFC. I think they had just kind of switched over maybe within a year or so.
Yep.
But I was fighting LFA, or it was RFA at the time. I was fighting RFA, and a lot of my fights were in Sioux Falls because that's where they got their biggest draw. And I was making, on sponsors like maybe 5 to 10 grand a fight.
Mhm.
And that was just local RFA, you
Right.
know, not even charging much for sponsorship, but I was just like kind of making money that way. And then, what I could have done in the UFC with that kind of being on TV and all that kind of stuff, I could have made at least 100 grand a year extra just on sponsors. But right away, it's like, oh, that's not the case. So wasn't something that I really worried about. Um, and that's when the social media stuff kind of started coming in. It's like, oh, you have to do something else, and that's be the social media. Then I would try, and I just wasn't into it. But then also, I didn't come from money or nothing like that. So starting to make over 50 grand a fight, I was like, okay, I'm doing all right. If I could fight a few times a year, I'm doing all right.
Mhm.
And we did. And it definitely could have been more. And then also I asked my question, okay, so what if it was more? How would that have affected my fighting? Would I have fought better? Would I have done better training? Would I have like moved my family, stuff like that?
Mhm.
So I think it's definitely can be more money. Um, and but how do you get to that money? I don't know. It's so hard. It's like maybe it's the star power, maybe it's how many social media followers you have, stuff like that. Nowadays, it's hard to tell, and that's kind of seems to be what's going on. If you have a following coming into it, they're going to pay you more money. And if you can fight on top of it, you're going to get some more. So I think it's I think it's getting better. The people that have the talent and have the full package are getting paid. Like Sean O'Malley, he could fight, he could talk, he could do all the social media stuff, and he became a millionaire off it. Pretty quick. Um, so I think you're going to see a lot more of that coming up is more full packages, people that can kind of do everything. There's a lot more entertainment value in it now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Especially like just a recent example of that, Paddy Pimblett. He's kind of
Yeah.
got that persona around him like Sean O'Malley, and it seems to work in his favor. But I just think that allowing all fighters to have sponsors on their shorts would be such a quick and easy way to kind of close that pay gap. But I don't make those decisions.
Well, it's the pay gap, but also like being able to put on for some of these companies.
Hmm.
It's not always just a money deal for the fighters and the companies. They might know the owner. They might have like for me for example in Sioux Falls, the people that sponsored me were either people that I had worked for because I'm in construction, It was so like construction companies and people in the trades, and they don't necessarily need to get their name out there internationally or even nationally. It's more of a regional local thing. But if I was able to rep those guys that helped bring me up, like that's just a special connection, right? And a good way to give back to some of these people that help you on the way up.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I never really thought about it that way, but that's interesting.
And
Yeah.
like my stance has always been on fighter pay. Like, 'cause look, I have a a wife, a son who's two, and you go
Yeah.
through life. And it's like it's very hard for me to be concerned with how much money anybody else in the world is making besides
Yeah.
my household. At the same
Mhm.
time, for the health of the sport, I have always felt that it is inevitable that they are going to have to change the way that they pay people or the way that they
Yeah.
allow fighters to be compensated at the very least for the health of the sport. It's going to be very hard to get consistently high level athletes to do something that is so hard to do for to
Yeah.
do the hard parts that make you a great fighter. It is so hard
Mhm.
to do. And at the same time, like as you said, like Sean O'Malley is what they would consider to be the whole package, like a
Yeah. Yeah.
championship level fighter. This guy has a legit personality. He's an interesting person, and he is able to do the social media stuff. But not everybody can do that, and that seems it's so hard to comprehend what those people's days must be like. Like,
Yeah.
is your schedule when you have to do that? And that's why, like, when I'm doing UFC picks episodes and talking about like
Mhm.
who can win big main events, and it's like, dude, like this guy's been on a lot of podcasts. He does his own podcast now. He's famous. He does all this and this. Like, I don't know how much time you can dedicate to training for a big fight when that is your life.
Yeah. Um, it would be hard for me. It's just like I said, having to spend hours a day on the computer, just not for a guy like me. And I think a lot of guys do pay other people to do it, so that does help.
Mhm.
But you have to have that money first to be able to pay these guys to run a professional, say, Instagram page or professional social media presence. Um, but I think it would be good if the UFC started doing more of a salary-based thing, right? So you start a salary, 100 grand a year, 150 grand a year. You know what you can do. You can plan out your training. You know your expenses for that and all that kind of stuff. Instead of having these fighters being like, oh, if I don't fight in 3 months, I can't pay my rent. Like
Right.
or I had to pay these credit cards, $1,000 in debt. I need this next fight, which might add a little bit to the grind of the fight, but then you're not be for a lot of people, I think you're not being as creative when you need to win that fight.
Mhm.
You're going to be a lot more safe. You're going to play it safe a little bit more. Um, and you're not going to take the risks that make exciting fights sometimes.
Yeah.
And I know that played a part with me. So I think a salary would be great.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because if you know you have to fight 2 or 3 times a year to make the money that you need, you're going to
Mhm.
try to mitigate and avoid injuries so you can continue
Yeah.
to fight. That definitely makes sense.
hmm But if they're like, hey, we're paying you this, then you can solely focus on what you need to do, and you don't have to worry about that. Then you can be more creative, and you can put together a better, you know, fight plan and life plan for the year because a lot of these guys have families and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah.
And so Devin, we've been talking for like close to an hour now, and we're glad to let you get back to your Sunday. But before we go today, one, thank you so much for being here. This has been an awesome
Yeah.
conversation. And if there's anything else you want to say or anybody you want to shout out, the floor is yours.
Oh, just thank you guys for having me on. I haven't done an interview in a while, and it feels good. I like having somebody on the other side of things instead of just putting posts out and this and that. I love the back and forth. Um, yeah, but just you guys will probably be seeing me fighting soon, hopefully this spring. So definitely not done fighting if anybody's wondering that. I haven't been very present on social media, so a lot of people are probably wondering if I'm just done or not. But no, Brown Bear's not done. Ready to kick some ass. So you guys will be seeing me.
Yeah, excited to see you back. Yeah.
And damn, glad you responded to my Instagram message with all
Oh,
that. And folks, this has been another interlude episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. It's been me and Connor Bones Slone in a conversation with Devin Brown Bear Clark. Thank you so much to Devin for being here. Can't wait to see what he does for the rest of 2026. And folks, thank you so much for listening to another interlude episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. We've got more UFC action and combat sports coming up in the this upcoming week. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady and on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Now available on Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music. And have yourselves a great rest of your week, and peace.